But other than these, the highest spirit called the Supreme Self, who, as the Undying Lord, enters the three worlds and sustains them. Sri Krishna is telling this verse to Arjuna in relation to the two things he spoke about in the last verse, regarding the Kshar, perishable, that is all creatures, and the Akshar, imperishable, that is the soul, both in the world of living beings. In this verse, God says that the Uttama Purush, the highest spirit, is other than these which with the use of the word Anya. The word Anya is very unique, and one cannot give a direct translation of it into English. Therefore, I would keep it only as Anya. The Uttama Purush, the highest spirit, is other than these and enters the three worlds and sustains them. The word Avishya comes from the word Vishya, meaning to enter. The Uttama Purush, the highest spirit, enters the three worlds and sustains them. The Uttama Purush, highest spirit, is different from what was described in the last verse. The Uttama Purush enters the three worlds and sustains them. Who is the Uttama Purush? He is the Avyayaha Ishvaraha, the Undying Lord, who is called the Paramatma, the Supreme Self. The phrase Ati Udattaha means he is called. Therefore, the Uttama Purush, the highest spirit, is different from the Kshar, perishable, and is also different from the Akshar, imperishable. Over here, the word Anya is not in the meaning of a someone else. If you read the majority of translations of the word Anya, then it would say that it means that he is someone else. The word Anya does not mean someone else, and the word Anya is not symbolic of being without something. The word Anya is symbolic of being distinguished. The Uttama Purush, the highest spirit, is a distinguished state. It is not as if the Uttama Purush, the highest spirit, is different according to the principles Advaita, non-duality, and according to the Shankar Bhashya. He is not different. This is because the individual soul and the Supreme Soul are one. God has said himself that Mama Vansho Jivaloke Chiva Bhuta Sanatana. A fragment or fraction of my own self becomes a living soul, eternal. God says that I am yours and you are mine. Therefore, Anya does not mean different. Then Anya means distinguished. How is he distinguished? What is the difference between the individual soul and the Supreme Soul? There is only one difference. The individual soul is a fragment or fraction of the Supreme Soul. And therefore, if you look at it one way, then it is a difference of quantity. But if you think about it deeply, then you realize that it is not a difference of quantity, because this is a very childish thing. The perspective of counting is the perspective of the material world. In spirituality, you cannot have the perspective of counting. A thinker has said it very nicely that it is because people have had the perspective of counting that sorrows have started. People keep thinking that this is too little and this is too much. This person has this and this person has that. I have less and the other person has more. It is not like that. If we do not have the perspective of counting, then as much as people take pride in the sun, people would take as much pride in the lamp. But people have the perspective of counting and think about the lamp having less light and the sun having more light. That is not necessary. Light is light. Then distinguishment is in the meaning that perspective of the individual soul, and the pull of the individual soul is towards the material world. If there is a family who have had wealth for generations and generations, and also has the qualities of dharma and have dharmic culture in their house, then if the son of this family and the son of a father in this family is begging someone to give him a cigarette, then what would happen between the father and the son? The father would say that, son, who are we? What is our family? And what is our culture, son? And you are running around begging for 10 rupees to smoke a cigarette from everyone. What would be the state of this father? This father would say that this son is mine because he has been born from my blood and he has been raised in my lap. He is my blood. And yet, is this different? You can understand the pain of this father, and it's very easy to understand this in today's times. Each and every person has this experience. If one can understand this pain, then one can understand that shade with which God says that the Uttama Purush, the highest spirit, is Anya, and therefore distinguished. God knows that, O individual soul, you are mine, and yet you are still being pulled towards the material world. Now if that pull comes away from the material world and in the direction of God, then no Anya remains. But while one has a pull towards the material world, then the material world will still remain for them. We must understand this. If a person did not have a pull towards the material world, then there would be no such thing as the material world. God has given us a boat, and the rest of the world has drowned. Where is this world? The material world is a projection. And while we are there, the material world is going to remain, and this attraction is going to remain. When this attraction goes, then everything that there is the Supreme Soul. This is Anyaha. In what meaning is the word Anyaha given here? Who is the Uttama Purush, the highest spirit? This is the individual soul, or the soul that does not get pulled by the material world, and does not get stuck in the material world. He lives in the material world and stays in the material world, but he himself is not for the material world. He lives in the material world like a lotus in mud. He lives in the material world, but he does not become of the material world. Such a one is a Purushottam, supreme person. God says that the Uttama Purush, the highest spirit, is called the Paramatmi, the supreme self, who as the Avyayaha Ishvaraha, the Undying Lord, enters the three worlds and sustains them. And the funny thing is that God considers the individual souls who are described as Anya to be different from him in order to facilitate and explain this concept to us. This individual soul does not even know that the Supreme Soul who enters the three worlds and sustains him, the Supreme Soul does not even understand this. This is just like when there is a young child of 2 months or 6 months. The mother looks after the child so much. The child does not know any of this, but the mother knows that when it is 11 o'clock, then it is feeding time, and when it is a certain time, then she has to give medicine to the child. She knows that when 3 months ago, then she had to give an injection to the child or serum to the child. The mother looks after all of this, but does the child know this? The child does not know anything. When the child's nappy goes wet, then the nappy has to be changed. The mother looks after all of this. The mother raises, supports, and nourishes the child, and does all of this. The child absolutely does not know who supports and nourishes him. How do they know how they do this and why they do this? The child does not know about these 3 things. The child has ignorance. The child is ignorant, and that is why the child does not know. The child is ignorant. The individual soul gets into the same state. It is fine that when the child grows up and becomes understanding, then its feelings begin to grow. That this is my mother, she looked after me very much and does everything for me. This bridge of love is built, but look at this predicament of the material world. 80 or 90 years get done, and still the individual soul cannot understand that the Supreme Soul has supported and nourished him throughout his entire life. He is not able to tie feelings with such a Supreme Soul that, who raises me, how do they raise me, and why do they raise me? You should think about these 3 questions of who raises me, how do they raise me, and why do they raise me? The child may not logically think like this, but a pessary is binded in his mind, and that is why he gets bound. Who does this? He remembers the face of the person who he calls mother. This is what the child does. How does she do this? The child thinks about the way in which the mother immediately takes him in her lap, and whenever he gets hungry and goes, then she gives him food to eat, and makes him cooks for him, looks after him, bathes him and washes him, brings clothes for him and puts clothes on for him. This is what the mother does. And the third question is, why does she do this? The child knows that this is a pure feeling. Then when they grow up, they say that the mother did this so that they would look after her when they grow up. All these calculations do not take place in the mother's heart. Why does the mother do this? It is for one reason, that the child is hers, and that is why. Therefore you should also think about this in relation to God, that who nourishes and supports me in this material world and in this life. It is God who does this. How does God do this? The entire history of your life comes in front of you. The Supreme Soul was with you during each and every step of your life. And why did God do this? There is only one reason, and that is God has said that Mame Vansho Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. A fragment or fraction of my own self becomes a living soul, eternal. God is doing this because I am God's. Otherwise, what does God want to take from me? What does God want from us? Just think about it. People think that when we perform bhakti, devotion to God, then this is good for God. It is not for God, but it is good for us. People say that when we perform two mala, prayer beads, then it is good for God. No, it is good for us. There is no difference to God, but it makes a difference to us. And God enters the three worlds and sustains and nourishes all three. God does not keep any feeling of differences. There is no difference of type, varna, colour, age, wealth, or any type of difference. The grace of the Supreme Soul is the same for each and every person.